Dave Reski, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of In the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths and misunderstandings of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Lisa Nickerson. Lisa is the CEO of Nickerson, a full-service branding, marketing, public relations, and communications agency. She's been recognized as a Globe Street Woman of Influence, a Boston Power Woman, and a Marketing Professional of the Year. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
So yeah, I really appreciate you being here. Full disclosure, I went to your holiday party this year and it was fabulous. So thanks again for inviting me. Yes, that was is that an annual tradition or is that something
it is. We called it the first annual because then that now commits us to doing it every year. But I love having a good event and I love a good party, and especially at Christmas time and the holidays, and being able to light the house up and decorate up and have everybody together was a lot of fun. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was a really fun time. So thank you for having me.
Sure.
But as you know, I like to start these conversations with a Mythbuster question. And the topic that you and I have been talking about is around one of my favorite subjects, which is digital marketing. And the idea is the myth I want to explore is you can get it all done with digital marketing. Is that true or not true?
I do not believe that it's true. But I thought that would be a good topic for you and I to toggle back and forth on, right? Because there are a lot of people that do think it's true, and they think that that is their best bang for their buck. And I think of marketing a little bit like when I ran the marathon. You don't just train by running from one spot to another. There's a lot of other pieces that go into it. And if you think about the marathon, you might be biking, you might be strength training, but you're also eating well, you're sleeping. There's all these different components that allow you to run 26 miles from one point to another. And marketing can be much the same. And while digital marketing, I think, is a really strong tool in the toolbox, there are so many other things that help support that and help give you those pieces that allow that digital marketing to be really successful. And I think sometimes those are forgotten.
So. Yeah, it's easy to forget them, especially in my world where we're so focused on things like SEO and PPC and Gary websites and all that. And it's easy to think that, just those things that are measurable kind of matter. But all these other things matter too, right? So it's your client's got to have all those different pieces. How do you talk to a client? Maybe you're across from a CMO and they're saying, hey, I don't want to spend money on branding or communications or PR because I can't measure the results like I can when I spend money on a Google PPC campaign. How do you have that conversation with them and kind of talk about the value of these other things?
Yeah, well, I think, again, first of all, it depends on the type of client, right? And it depends on their budget and their goals. And so first and foremost, when we're all working with clients, one of the things I think about is, what are their needs? Do they have the money to support the goals that they have, right? And are they making a commitment to working together to get there? And so those three pieces are critical. First, when you're talking to any other CMO, CEO, heads of business development, I also think that having conversations with the people that are in the sales are really critical in helping you know where the challenges are. And so when you're talking to a CMO, you look at the budget and you say, what can we do in this budget? And then also determine what's reasonable and put a strategy together. And so with that strategy, it helps us go the right direction, right? So you're on a plane, you're taking off out of Boston, and maybe you're looking to land in New York, maybe you're looking to land in Memphis, but if you're off by just a few degrees, you're landing in a different city, right? So when we're creating these strategies, it's really important that we know which direction we're trying to go and that we've really thought about all the different aspects of whether it's the campaign, the constraints we have within the organization, the economic environment and what's happening, and how are those things going to impact us over the next year, 2, 3 years. And then the other thing that we look at is the time horizon. Are we reporting for the quarter or are we reporting for the year and such? And so knowing what those benchmarks are along the way allow us to say, okay, this much can go to the digital piece, but does the digital have all the components it needs to effectively get to that city that you're looking to land in, right?
Yeah, there's you said so much there. I just want to unpack each of those things kind of one at a time, but there's so many big ideas there. And one of those is really the strategy piece, really, and the goals. What are they trying to accomplish? It feels like, when we engage with a client on a digital marketing campaign, let's say they want to run Google ads, let's say, and they want, results. We're kind of depending on them to have a strategy in place. We're kind
Mhm.
of depending on them to have a brand and supporting
Mhm.
PR and content and other things in place in order to make that happen. And if they don't have that, the whole thing becomes harder. I mean, going back to your travel analogy, it's kind of like you're aiming to go to this city, but you haven't decided if you're going to walk, ride a bike, or drive
Right,
or fly, right? So
right, right.
you just start out, and so I think that's what people do sometimes when they do digital. They put up
Mhm.
the quick website, they start spending some money on ads, and they don't really know where they're going and which direction and the easiest way to get there. And in those ways, how do you have those strategy conversations with clients? Is it really about the budget? Is it about where they're at? Do you do an audit? Is there analysis? Kind
It's a
of where do you
lot of
get?
questions, right?
Yeah.
It's asking a lot of questions. And I'm thinking about a comment that you made in one of your other podcasts where you said sometimes people expect you to be a magician. And
Mm,
so it's really, it's setting that expectation for if you want me to be a magician, then let's start with again, what rabbits do we have up our sleeves, right? In order to be able to pull this off. And uh, it's again, it's always starting with the goal, right? And what is that goal that that company has and looking at the time horizon? Um, and and really trying to look at whether that's reasonable or not. Now, again, for some people, I like a challenge. Right? I love a challenge, and knowing people's strengths. I have team members who are super competitive, and you tell them it can't be done, and they'll say challenge accepted. I have other team members that like that good to great. They want to be very strategic, and they want to take something a certain way, but they don't necessarily get as excited about the crazy challenge, right? They just want to make sure that they're hitting where they should be. And so again, knowing who your client is and what excites them about how we work together. Um, but then knowing whether this is going to be really challenging for real and and then do they have the budget to support that challenge, right? And if they don't, sometimes it's about resetting expectations too. And sometimes there's not good news, right? Sometimes we have to say uh what we think might realistically happen is this, but then I always try and end with, but the good news is we could achieve this with this, or let's think about something differently. Sometimes it's about the suggestion of another alternative,
mm.
right? So have you had clients who say, we want to do this, we want to do this, and we want you to do that? And you can be an order taker and say, okay, or you can say, let's back up and ask a lot of questions, understand where the red flags might even be, and then maybe even come up with an alternate plan. So
Yeah,
the
it's
beginning part, you asked a very simple question. I gave you a very long answer. It's asking a lot of questions at the offset.
Yeah, I think that's super important. It seems like what you're talking about is requires a deep trust relationship with that CEO or CMO in order to
Hmm.
get there. You're asking questions, you're kind of giving feedback, you're talking about your experience, you're
Hmm.
you're giving setting expectations based on what you've seen happen. It seems
Sure.
like they could talk to another agency and say, "No, it's easy. You don't spend that much. You can do it. Get started with me. I can make that happen." And they can promise
Yep.
the magic. But you've got to be able to have that trust relationship to get them to reality. How do you, beyond questioning, how do you develop that trust? And you kind of, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, but it's like dating, right? Like when you're dating and you're out there, you're talking to a handful of different people and one person's promising one thing and another's promising another, right? And there's something that feels right. And so I think that's the other thing about an agency relationship. It is a relationship and you build that yin and that yang and you build that trust, but you also need to know what that person's strengths are because not all agencies are created equally, but also just sometimes there's a different persona or a different style. And so it's finding the group that really is right for you. And sometimes when we don't end up working with a new client and they choose somebody else, I actually feel really good about that because that was the type of style that felt good to them. And if they'd gone with us, it might have been a miss, right? Other times we are that right style for somebody. And so, but again, it's leaning into strengths, right? And understanding what even a client's strengths are, right? And so this is something that maybe I'm talking a lot about. We've done a lot of coaching. A woman named Johnny Johnson is our coach, and she works with Clifton Strengths. And she works with my team and coaching my team to not only understand each other better, but really be able to read what our clients are asking for in a much better and more intuitive way. So again, so that we're not just being order takers, right? They're not just telling us to do something and then we do it. Because really what somebody's saying is, this is what I want to make happen. And it's our job to tease out what they really need in order to make that happen.
Mm.
And so again, I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but
Yeah, absolutely.
from there, it's from that teasing, right, that you learn. And then you also learn how to come back to that client, that CMO, that CEO in a way that feels good to them, right?
Yeah, I love the analogy of the order taker, right?
Hmm.
So, and maybe let's talk for a few minutes about that relationship between an order taker versus being an agency.
Sure.
What you're talking about is that agency relationship where you have this trust relationship where
Hmm.
you're engaged in strategy, you're making things happen, you're doing the work, but you're
Right.
also a trusted advisor to help them think about where this is going and why they should do it, and maybe why they shouldn't do certain things. In the order taking world, it seems like another option for a CMO is to say, I really don't want any of that. I'd rather just work with a set of contractors to do exactly what I want,
Right.
exactly when
Right.
I want it, and why are you questioning any of my strategies or thoughts? I just want you to do what I say. So that we've had
Mhm.
client relationships like that too. Um,
How
and those are a little
successful were
hard.
they?
They're hard. They're hard because the clients, like we just, we're just winding down a relationship where the client said, instead of saying, hey, we want a digital campaign where we want to achieve these goals with this budget and this in period of time, they said, no, we want you to focus on advertising this much money on this keyword for this period of
Hmm.
time with this landing page. And we're just kind of pulling the levers
Hmm.
on the Google ad thing. And it's not a terrible thing, but they have to assume in that mode responsibility for all the results. And
So
that's the hard thing, I think, that when the
is
client treats you as an order taker, but then they hold you accountable for all the results. So I don't know, it's
right.
complicated. How do you feel about that?
Isn't it so interesting when you sit down with a client and they say, I'm thinking this or I'm thinking that. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, one of the most successful CEOs we work with, we don't always agree. We don't always agree on how we're going to get there or what we're going to do, but he always listens. And
Yeah.
I find that so interesting that I work so hard for this particular group. Not, I mean, we work hard for all the groups, but this because the conversations are so dynamic and he asks my opinion and then we have thoughtful discussion about why we're going to go one direction or another, and through that thoughtful discussion then I actually learn more about that company and why they're making the choices they are or why they want us to approach something the way that they do, and or how they want us to approach something the way they want us to do it. And so it's that conversation that's so important, um and understanding the why, because when we understand the why, even if they are providing us a clear direction, if we understand the why, then we can just do a much better job. Here's the other difference on my agency versus yours, for example, where we're not an exact science. And I have a lot of analogies, but my other analogy is the hot air balloon. And I grew up my dad flying a hot air balloon, and that's the picture that's in all of the Nickerson stock photography of balloons is actually my dad's balloon or somebody that he was friends with. And the hot air balloon, I feel like, is more the marketing that we do, where we we file a flight plan, right? A hot air balloon is an FAA registered aircraft. You file a flight plan, but it's not an exact science. You don't know that you're going to land exactly in one spot. You have a ground crew that supports you and follows you, right? But when you get up in that air, you're using the winds to navigate where you want to go. And so just like the economy, just like changes in employees or changes in sales, changes in uh, the political environment. You have a pandemic, right? Winds change sometimes very quickly, and we have to navigate that balloon so that we get to the end safely, as close to where our target is as possible. And that's really more that public relations, creative, social media. It's not the exact science of the digital where we can look at it, measure it, there's numbers and there's data. So when you're also talking about clients, some clients, they want straight data, they want straight numbers, and others understand that variability, and some have more tolerance for one than the other. And so again, it's how does that mix come together can sometimes be really about who your client is and how they see the world from a data perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful analogy, the hot air balloon analogy, and it sounds like you're really good at helping clients navigate those decisions and the complexity and the expectations of where that balloon's going to
Sure.
land, and having the whole team. I love the analogy of having the whole team there to support the flight, the landing, and
Right.
through all of that.
And then popping the champagne at the end. So, that was a funny coincidence. I've been saying cheers since college when I had an internship and that director of public relations said cheers. And I took it from her and I've always enjoyed it because I feel like cheers is, you're enjoying the work together, you're enjoying the challenge, you're enjoying the good times, and then you're, hopefully celebrating the great times. And when we created the balloon analogy a few years back, it actually was only 4 years ago now. Um, and I thought about how the balloon is part of the navigating and elevating the experiential journey and all of these things that we talk about. Um, at the end of every flight, you pop a bottle of champagne and everyone says cheers. And it's, you toast to safe landings. And so I thought that was a great coincidence for us too, that, that how do you get there? But, when I do talk about it, whether marketing is an exact science or not, people get it. Like when you give them that analogy of like managing the winds, and that's another thing. Our agency does a lot of risk management, public and crisis relations. And so when we're working on crisis, again, that's because that wind shifted very quickly and we need to do something in order to navigate that safe landing. And so um, people seem to get it when you look at it that way.
Yeah, that's the intangible when you really make a huge difference.
Sure.
So we've often talked about clients that have limited budgets and lots
Mhm.
of constraints. What do you do when
Mhm.
you get a client that says, all right, Lisa, I trust you. I trust your agency. I've got a big budget. I want to make big things happen.
Yep.
And I totally get it. That's going to take time. How do you kind of put together the ultimate campaign? And what does that look like for a client? Let's
Yeah.
say let's say you're working with a medium-sized
Mhm.
organization. They've got, the resources, the team. What do you like to do for clients in that environment?
So that sounds like a lot of fun. I like
Mhm.
clients who like to make things happen. And thankfully, I have a team of people who all have different strengths in their categories. And so we sit down and we start looking at the budget. I do like to look at what they've done previously and understand, what do we know worked? What do we know didn't work? What truths are there that we believe? And even recently, I was talking to a client who's been very successful over the past 40 years. And I said, do you think that your beliefs of what was successful in the past will get in the way of what we need to do in the future? And at first he said, no, not at all. And then by the end of the meeting, he said, this is why I need to not be in these meetings anymore. Because we were talking about all these new strategies for ways of doing things. And we talked about what worked in the past and why it may not work in the future. But I didn't come in and say, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. We actually talked through it in a really thoughtful manner of, just understanding how the approach had been and then starting to lay out a groundwork. Again, very high level out of the gate so that we had some agreements, that we had um, some acknowledgement that they felt we were on the right track. And then from there, we started to build out a much more in-depth strategy. But not to sound repetitive, but what's that short-term benchmark that tells us that our flight pattern's in the right direction? And then what are the long-term goals that we're getting to? And you have to absolutely adjust along the way. This is not, just set it and forget it, right? I think that's something I see all the time. If we win a new client, it's because some agency has been in set it and forget it mode for a while. And it was time just to reevaluate. And it was time to look at things outside of what you're doing every day and see if there were new opportunities, new areas to add value. And the best part is when you surprise somebody with something they didn't expect and it was a added value or an added bonus, that something was achieved that you didn't even expect to achieve. So that's that's my goal.
And those are the powerful moments for clients. What are those short-term benchmarks that you look for with a client? If you're doing PR, communications, or branding or strategy, what are some of those benchmarks to help you know that you're on the right track with where the client wants to go?
Yeah. So sometimes it's again, really, I would say it depends the client, right?
Mhm.
So some clients, it's just the buzz, right? The buzz changes, the scuttlebutt changes, right? So that could be part of it. If it's brand reputation, that could be part of it. numbers, sales, are sales up? Is again, for some clients, it's traffic to their website. To other clients, it might be particular meetings that are set. Um, having those tight ties with business development and with sales is really important because they're going to tell you faster than anybody whether something's hitting, whether something's working for them or not. So those are kind of those short ones, you know, that we're often looking at. Some of our clients, they just want the median numbers. They want to know that there was a certain amount of viewership or a certain amount of readership. So it's again, it really depends the clients. We have some smaller clients and we have startups, we have go-to-markets, and then we have one of the largest REITs in the world. So, it's very different what different people want, but knowing that they're not all created equal, right? And knowing that they all have different criteria, and making sure you're meeting, exceeding that is really where you got to go.
So you can have short-term numbers, you can kind of point to early results, but then you know where you're going with a long-term strategy. Coming back
Oh, absolutely.
to the relationship with digital marketing, in my
Hmm.
experience, when a client does strategic marketing and PR really well,
Hmm.
everything gets easier, and we don't often, I think in one of our challenges is we don't often give credit to PR and strategic communications because we're probably taking all the credit ourselves. It's a great campaigns and on the landing page, look at this offer. We fixed the keyword, we're bidding
Right.
properly, we're working the channels, we're kind of working all this stuff. But in
Hmm.
reality, when the brand is better, when the news is better, when all of that,
Yep.
everything gets easier.
Right.
And it's
Right.
hard. There must be some better way we could measure that between the digital side and strategic marketing, right?
Well,
So,
I think there's the social media too. And so when you've got great PR, what we've seen in our statistics and in our planning is that when we have a great PR piece and then you utilize that as part of a digital campaign, as that part of a social campaign, now you're just amplifying that earned media, right? So that more people see it. If the tree falls in the woods and nobody heard it the first time, well, then we need the tree to fall a whole bunch more times, right?
mhm.
And so that's a big part of it is people do believe earned media. They do believe what is still in the paper. There's nothing like a great feature on network television, especially during the evening news or the weekend news. And when we have those gems of pieces, and then we can utilize that in social media, in the digital marketing, and in other ways over and over, we find that's really successful. But without those key pieces of content, it is harder and it makes your job a lot harder. So it's keeping that going. Now, like anything, have you ever gone on a really great workout plan and you get in great shape? You have to maintain it, right? So maybe it's a much bigger lift in the beginning, but then at least staying on a maintenance plan, right? So that you continue to have good pieces of whether it's press or media or uh, just being a subject matter expert in the industry and staying top of mind with people, it goes a long way to keeping that going. But if you haven't done it at all, it's that lift, is that lift of getting up that's always a little more challenging and that we're navigating to make sure we get on the right track.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to add to that, you know, is a challenge for digital marketing is that risk and crisis. So if you've got a strong brand out there already and good things going, but something goes wrong, and it could be by no fault of your own, but now you're in the media or you're in the news, to be able to shift that very quickly, you can't just put a digital marketing campaign up to do that. That is the public relations. That is that media management. And that's a lot of intangible. And so then how do we coordinate with the digital, with the social to make sure that that message is now either changed or altered and sometimes very quickly is key. And I would say for you, there have been groups that have said, nope, this is the plan. This is what we've already approved and we need to shift very quickly because maybe the plan that you had is now not appropriate for what the message needs to be. And so the most successful campaigns, everybody's working together. Everybody's got their hand on or their finger on the pulse of what's happening and they're talking fairly regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, so as a digital marketer, we might just want to ignore that whole crisis and just say, oh, the people who are searching
Right.
this keyword or the people who are going to get this email campaign, they're not going
Mhm.
to. know about all that other stuff. But the reality is it's all important. And I think what you said is super important. The collaboration between strategic marketing, between the branding agency, between PR and what we're doing on the digital side is so important. And I think one of the pieces that you mentioned that are really critical is where content comes together. Because
Mhm.
we often think about content in terms of offers or websites or, you know, content pieces, but the content that you're creating for clients, especially if it's news oriented content,
Mhm. Mhm.
or an interview or something that's really amazing, that can have a huge impact on the campaign. And we can measure that in terms of click-through rates and conversion rates and
Right.
lower cost per conversion. We can measure the impact of that. But it makes that those strategic hits can be amazing, and when we put them all together.
Sure. But managing that message, right, that's an art. And working with the media in order to have that message come the way you want it to is something that, to have that gem, it's got to go just right. That message has got to be just right. And we work really hard at that.
Yeah. Well, one of my big takeaways from this conversation is we should be working closer together. Strategic marketing,
I think that's what
PR,
we
and
talked about at
digital.
the holiday party too, right?
They
We said
abs-
we have to work together more.
yeah, absolutely. But in all of our campaigns, our team has got to be thinking more about strategic marketing, branding, PR, that whole
Mhm.
and all those strategic messages. And
Yeah.
then I think that there's on your side, there's a lot of ways you can ask the digital agency for numbers actually to support the
Sure.
strategic impact of what you're doing. So there's
Yeah.
lots to do that. Well,
Well, it helps validate sometimes what we're doing, right? So when we do our reporting to clients, the more numbers that we can have that validates the good work that we do, then for somebody that's checking a box. It might be the CFO, might be the COO, but there is that person that leans into that strength of data, of liking data and analyzing data, and we want to have that for that person too.
yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, Lisa. We've covered trust, strategy, marketing impact, so many good ideas. So
I
thank you.
taught you a little bit about hot air ballooning, maybe some things
Exactly.
you
I've
never
got
knew.
I got to try it out sometime. So I'm sure you can get me hooked up.
I,
Um,
I can take care of that.
yeah, absolutely. So if our listeners want to learn more about you or your agency, what's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. Absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn. I joke that LinkedIn is my love language. I love LinkedIn. It's been a great way to keep in touch with people over a long period of time and keep up with where they are and what they're doing. And then also the website is nickersoncos.com, like Nickerson Companies. And I just want to leave you with our theme of the year, something my mother always said to me growing up, don't get ready, be ready. So
Mm,
if you think about that, that's about your strategy. That's about doing all the things that aren't waiting to the last minute or waiting until you need to do them, but doing them so that when you're in go time, you're ready to go. So that's what I want you to remember. Don't get ready, be ready.
don't get ready, be ready. Well, all of our
Right?
listeners can put that into action right away. So thank you very much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.